The fierce storm had swallowed the Montana wilderness in a blanket of silent white. Within a solitary cabin, a retired Navy SEAL sat staring into the dying embers of the fire. It was the last flicker of warmth in a life that had grown cold. Then, piercing the howling blizzard, came a long, aching howl. Not wild or fierce, but broken and raw. He froze, listening intently. That sound wasn't just a lonely cry, it was a desperate call for help. Pulling his coat tight against the biting cold, he stepped into the storm, his boots sinking deep, swallowed by the snow. Every echo of the howl led him further into the shadowed pines where something or someone waited silently in the dark. What he uncovered in that frozen night will restore your faith that even in the harshest winters, miracles find their way to those lost in the cold. But before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop the name of your country in the comments below. The Montana wilderness lay blanketed beneath a heavy shroud of snow. Pine branches bowed low beneath the weight, and the air hung still, crisp and brittle, like fragile glass. It was one of those winter nights when the whole world seemed to hold its breath. Nestled in the heart of that vast silence stood a small log cabin, half drowned in snowdrifts, with smoke rising faintly from the chimney. Inside, a single lantern burned low, its trembling light casting shadows across the wooden walls. Logan Hayes sat alone in the corner close to the wood stove, elbows resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the orange glow flickering behind the iron door. He was 38 years old, broad-shouldered, yet lean, his physique forged by years of military discipline and hardship. His short, dark brown hair, touched with gray, clung damply to his forehead. A trimmed beard framed a face etched by wind and memory. It was the kind of face that seemed older when he wasn't smiling, which was most of the time. His steel blue eyes, sharp yet distant, bore a weariness no amount of sleep could erase. Around him, the cabin was meticulously kept, organized like a soldier's quarters, everything folded squared, placed with purpose. But the silence wasn't peace. It was a suffocating weight pressing down on his chest. On the small table beside him lay a worn dog tag and a faded photograph. 5 men in Navy SEAL uniforms, arms draped around each other, sand beneath their boots, sunlight warming their faces. 4 were gone now. The last man sat alone in this remote Montana cabin, trying to forget a world that refused to be forgotten. Outside, the storm had been building since dusk, a restless, howling beast clawing at the roof. Logan's rough, scarred hands absently fed another log into the fire. He had grown accustomed to the wind's relentless song. Out here, distant from everyone, it was his only companion. The gusts filled the night like whispered ghosts lingering just beyond the door. But tonight, the wind carried a different sound. At first, soft and subtle, almost mistaken for the creak of a branch, came a long, mournful cry rising and falling through the storm. Logan lifted his head, waiting. The wind gusted once more, and the sound came again, clearer now, filled with aching desperation. This was no ordinary cry. It was alive. Slowly he stood, instinct tightening in his chest. The soldier inside him, the part trained to recognize distress, sprang to life before his mind could catch up. He crossed the room, threw open the heavy cabin door, and faced a wall of blinding white. The wind roared in like a wild beast, his teeth clenched through the worn flannel, hesitation gripping him for a fleeting moment as the fire's warmth beckoned behind him. Then, shattering the stillness, a desperate cry pierced the night, faint aching, a raw plea that cut through the silence. "Damn it," he whispered, snatching his coat from its hook. The olive-green military parka hung faded and frayed sleeves patched over time. He slid on his gloves, pulled the hood tight against the storm, and stepped out into the relentless blizzard. Each step vanished under swallowing snow. Beyond the cabin, the forest stood dark, and foreboding frost-covered branches shifting in the fury. He advanced cautiously, flashlight in hand, its beam slicing through dancing flurries like glowing embers. That haunting sound echoed again, broken howls fading into silence, only to return weaker still. Deeper into the woods, memories surged, days lost to deserts and jungles where screams and silence both signaled peril. His breath billowed before him in the freezing air, and beneath the blanket of snow and isolation, something awakened. That old unwelcome surge of purpose. The sound guided him to a small clearing where a fallen pine cradled a shallow hollow. He dimmed the flashlight, freezing in place. There, half hidden by snow's embrace, lay a German shepherd. Her coat, black and tan, was matted with ice, dulled by frost's cruel touch. One front paw twisted unnaturally. Dark blood dried stark against white. She lifted her head weakly, where the light found her amber eyes, glassy yet alert. She met his gaze without a growl, only a soft whimper that sounded more like a plea than fear. Logan knelt slowly, snow crunching under his knees. "Hey there," he murmured, voice rough from cold. "Easy now. It's all right." The dog's side heaved unevenly, breaths shallow and visible in the frosty air. He extended a gloved hand, and though she flinched, she froze, watching him intently. Her body trembled violently, but in her eyes no wildness, only sheer exhaustion, and he couldn't deny the trust there. He peeled off a glove, pressing fingers gently to her neck, searching for a pulse beneath the fur. A faint warmth fluttered beneath his touch, weak but steady. "You're still holding on," he breathed. Snowflakes clung to his beard as he leaned closer. "Let's get you out of this storm." He lifted her with care, arms snug around her fragile frame. She felt lighter than she should, ribs sharp beneath tangled, matted fur scattered with debris. As he stood, a soft whine escaped her lips, head weakly resting on his shoulder. He began the trek back to the cabin, breath-heavy boots sinking deep into snow. The cold bit harshly at his skin, but inside, a different fire burned, a spark that hadn't ignited in years, carrying one who needed him again. When he pushed open the door, warmth enveloped them like a shield. Gently, he set her beside the hearth, closing out the tempest. The cabin felt smaller, yet somehow more alive. He wrapped her snugly in a wool blanket, the kind he'd carried through missions, settling beside her. Her eyes tracked his every move as he fed the fire's hungry mouth, then filled a metal bowl with warm water. She sniffed at it, but didn't drink, her breath shallow and erratic. "You're a fighter," he said softly, brushing melting snow from her fur. "Been out there longer than you should have, huh?" The dog blinked slowly, seemingly responding. He noticed a faint, clean scar tracing her ear, straight and surgical, not born of battle. Maybe she had once belonged to someone. Maybe she had been trained. He knew that kind of unwavering loyalty didn't simply appear out of nowhere. Outside, the storm raged, slamming wind and rain fiercely against the cabin walls. Inside, only the crackling fire and her faint, steady breathing filled the silence. Logan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. She reminded him of another life, a soldier he once rescued from the rubble of a collapsed building overseas. The same fragile breath clinging to existence. The same silent plea never to be abandoned. He hadn't been able to save that man, but maybe, just maybe, he could save her. Hours slipped by before she finally slipped into a restless sleep. Logan stayed long after, unable to tear his eyes away. There was something sacred in that fragile life, something that reached deep into the hollow space inside him that neither whiskey nor solitude could ever fill. When he finally rose to check the window, dawn was just a faint silver line threading through the trees. The storm was beginning to fade. He looked down on her one last time before standing. "You're safe now," he whispered, though a shadow of doubt lingered in his heart. He turned toward the stove, tossed on another log, and sank back into his chair, exhaustion creeping over him like the snow outside. But just as his eyes closed, she stirred. A soft sound. Not a whimper this time, but a steady, quiet breath. It sounded almost like trust. For the first time in years, Logan Hayes let the firelight warm his face, and didn't feel so alone. The storm had not yet fully passed. When Logan awoke, The gray morning light sifted weakly through the frost-covered window, casting a pale glow across the cabin's interior. The fire had burned low, leaving only faint embers behind. Yet the scent of pine and smoke lingered in the air. For a moment he forgot where he was. Then, a soft, broken sound brought him back, the whimper of the German shepherd lying close to the hearth. He moved nearer, his joints aching from the cold and the fitful sleep that never lasted more than an hour at a stretch. The dog shifted under the blanket, her ears twitching at his movement. Her fur, once stiff with ice, was now damp and tangled. The wound on her paw had crusted over, but she flinched when he touched it. "Easy, girl," he whispered, softer than he expected. She turned her head, slightly amber eyes locking with his, and the look hit him harder than any memory. A mixture of pain, confusion, and a loyalty forged through hardship and heartache. He tore a strip of clean cloth from an old undershirt, soaked it in warm water, and gently began to clean the wound. She didn't resist, just watched him with shallow breaths. "You need a name," he said quietly. "Can't just keep calling you Hey Dog." He studied her face. Intelligent eyes, a noble muzzle, and a scar near her left ear. Luna, he chose after a moment. "You look like a Luna, strong. Been through the dark, but still shining." Stepping back, he watched as Luna shifted, curling closer to the stove's warm glow. For a fleeting moment, he allowed himself to feel something like peace. But it was all too brief. Every few minutes, she raised her head toward the door, ears pricked, listening to the storm's relentless roar outside. Then she let out a soft, heart-wrenching whine, scraping her uninjured paw across the wooden floor, a sound that stabbed into Logan's chest like a sharp blade. He knelt beside her again, hoping to soothe her trembling frame, his hand gently resting on her neck. "There's nothing out there," he whispered, though doubt lingered in his voice. Luna whimpered once more, her eyes locked onto the window's ghostly frame. Logan recognized that look, a look he'd seen not in animals but in the haunted eyes of soldiers, a silent plea for something lost forever, knowing deep down it would never return. He exhaled slowly, sinking against the wall. "You and me both, girl," he murmured. "You and me both." Outside, the storm raged, the wind screaming through every crack and crevice. Snow hammered against the windows like bullets. Logan reignited the fire, pouring himself a cup of black coffee bitter with smoke and solitude. His gaze fixated on the dancing flames. This life years of quiet endurance, strict discipline, and relentless haunting. Many nights he spoke to the silence as if it were an old friend. Tonight, though, the silence was filled with Luna's voice. By mid-afternoon, the storm had swallowed the entire forest whole. Logan couldn't see beyond a few feet past his cabin's door. The dog needed help, but the closest town was 20 miles away. Still, he grabbed his old radio transceiver to call the tiny veterinary clinic, an outdated device he usually relied on to reach rangers or passing trucks when the generator failed. The signal crackled, then settled. Golden Meadow Veterinary came a woman's voice, clear yet touched with weariness. "This is Dr. Grace Bennett speaking." Logan hesitated for a moment before replying. "This is Logan Hayes. I live near Elk Ridge. I've got an injured dog here, a German shepherd. Found her in last night's storm." There was a pause, followed by the sound of hurried scribbling. "What condition is she in?" she asked briskly, though her tone softened, hearing the strain in his voice. "Cold weak with an injured paw. She looks undernourished," he said. "Won't drink much. Keeps whining as if she's searching for something." Grace sighed softly into the receiver. "If she's been out long, she'll need antibiotics, maybe fluids. I can drive up, but those roads are treacherous right now. Are you sure you're near Elk Ridge? That's quite a way out." "I'll make sure the path is clear," Logan answered. He gave her directions, then turned off the radio, feeling an unexplainable flutter of hope stirring within him. 2 hours later, just as the wind began to relent, a faint rumble rolled through the trees. Logan stepped outside his boots, sinking deeply into the slushy snow. Through the heavy veil of snowfall, headlights emerged, the stubborn glow from a small blue pickup slowly climbing the slope. It halted in front of his cabin, engine coughing weakly. From the driver's seat stepped a woman wrapped in a long gray coat, her auburn hair tossed into a messy braid tucked beneath a wool cap. Grace Bennett was in her early 30s, tall and slender, her movements measured yet sure. Her pale skin flushed from the cold, and her steel blue eyes held the quiet strength forged by years of witnessing pain and perseverance. She bore the look of someone who'd learned to keep moving when all others gave up a healer's quiet, unwavering resilience. "You must be Logan," she said, brushing snow from her sleeves. Her voice was calm and gentle. He nodded. "Come in." Inside, Grace slipped off her gloves, crouched beside Luna, and tenderly examined her. "She's stunning," she whispered softly. "Older female, maybe 5 or 6 years old. You said you found her during the storm." "Last night," Logan answered, partly sheltered under a fallen tree. Luna had been whimpering constantly. Grace gently ran her fingers through the dog's damp coat, searching carefully for any wounds. Luna tolerated the touch, though she trembled when Grace pressed near her ribs. "She's dehydrated and terrified," Grace said softly with concern. "She's not just wounded, she's mourning something," Grace added quietly. Logan frowned. "Mourning." Grace lifted her gaze to meet his. "Animals grieve, Mr. Hayes, especially loyal ones like her. She's likely lost someone important, a handler, maybe even her pups." Her voice held quiet strength, yet her eyes softened when she noticed the faint pain flickering across Logan's face. He didn't respond, instead, turning to the stove to feign adjusting the fire. Grace lingered with her gaze, sensing the invisible barrier he built around himself. She recognized that same wall in many veterans' men who'd survived but never really came back home. As she cleaned and cared for Luna's injury, a fragile warmth settled over the cabin's quiet corners. Logan brewed tea as a silent gesture of kindness, placing a mug gently near her elbow. "Thank you," she murmured, a faint smile breaking through. "Most wouldn't open their door to a wounded animal during a blizzard." "I wasn't planning to," he confessed, "but she left me no choice." Grace chuckled lightly, but the sound faded when Luna lifted her head and fixed her gaze on the door again. Then came the sound, a low, mournful whine that swelled into an anguished cry. Logan froze the room thick with tension. Grace's eyes widened. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. The cry came once more, not from Luna this time, but from far beyond the cabin walls, a faint, high-pitched yelp carried on the biting wind. Luna scrambled up, ignoring the throbbing pain in her paw. Her claws scraped the wooden floor. She dashed to the door, pressing her head against it, barking sharp, frantic, heart-wrenching. Logan's heart raced. "That sounded like—" Grace began, but Logan was already reaching for his coat. "Stay here," he ordered. Before she could argue, he flung the door open. A blast of icy air rushed through, scattering embers from the stove. Luna pushed past him, limping into the storm, releasing her cry again into the endless white expanse. Logan stepped into the biting cold after her, the echo of her desperate calls ringing through the towering pines. Not random, not wild, but driven by intent. Somewhere out there in the blinding snow, something was answering her call. By morning, the snow had quieted, wrapping the land in a serene, white silence stretching for miles. The Montana forest appeared peaceful now, but Logan Hayes knew better. The silence could be deceiving. He stood outside the cabin, cold seeping through his coat as his breath fogged in the crisp morning air. Luna paced near the porch, nose to the earth, tail stiff, the wound on her paw nearly healed, but her spirit restless and uneasy. She paused frequently, lifting her head ears pricked toward the woods as if awaiting a reply only she could hear. Grace Bennett stood beside him, gloved hands tucked deep in her wool coat pockets. Her cheeks glowed rosy from the wind, her steel-gray eyes studying the snow. She looked nothing like the fragile woman he'd imagined when she arrived the night before. Her cheeks were flushed from the biting wind, and her steely gray-blue eyes scanned the snowy expanse. She was nothing like the delicate woman he had imagined when she arrived last night. In her stood a quiet strength, shaped by the weight of endured pain, the kind that forges a soul capable of standing tall through any storm. She's ready to move on? Grace whispered gently. She's hunting for something lost. Logan gave a solemn nod. Yeah, I think she's been howling to find them. Grace met his gaze, worry shadowing her face. Do you believe she had puppies? He breathed out slowly, a soft mist fading in the icy air. That's exactly what it seems like. Her howls aren't just noise, they're a call. He crouched, brushing a gloved hand through snow near the porch. If those pups are out there, they won't survive long. Grace paused, then spoke. Then we have to find them. They packed swiftly. Logan secured a small bag of medical supplies Grace had brought, along with a flashlight and a warm blanket. The sun, weak and veiled by clouds, hung low. They trusted Luna's lead into the forest, her paws driven with intent. She sniffed the ground, darted forward, pausing every few feet to look back at them. The woods were an intricate tapestry of snow and shadows. The wind whispered through the pines, shaking delicate snowflakes from the branches. Logan trailed behind Grace, observing her unwavering steps, impressed by her silent grit. She bore the harsh landscape and quiet without a single complaint. He'd seen that in her before, unyielding resilience, not afraid of hardship or stillness. You've done this before, he said, as they climbed over a fallen tree. Grace glanced back, a faint smile touching her lips. Rescues. I used to volunteer in search and rescue for lost pets after storms. My husband and I started it together before he passed. Logan stayed quiet. He sensed the tremble in her voice, the weight of old memories carefully masked.
Doris!
I'm sorry, he finally said. She offered a soft shrug. He was a good man, did disaster relief work. He died in a landslide in Nepal. We were meant to go together, but I stayed back because our dog was sick. Sometimes I wonder if she sensed it too, she said before shaking off the thought. Life has its own way of making choices for us. Logan didn't push, he knew that voice well. It was grief cloaked in quiet acceptance, a mask he himself had worn for years. They walked in silence until Luna suddenly stopped, nose pressed deep into the snow. Logan dropped to his knees beside her. Faint paw prints marked the ground, small, scattered tracks left unevenly in the snow. He brushed the snow away to reveal streaks of dried red. Blood, he whispered. Grace crouched beside him. It's faint, probably days old, but it proves they were here. Luna whimpered softly, circling the area, her tail-low eyes piercing the surrounding woods. Then she surged forward again, her entire body tensed with urgency. They trailed her for nearly half a mile, until the forest unfolded into a clearing. The snow was churned and rough there. Logan's sharp gaze caught tire marks cutting through the whiteness, deep ruts heading south. Grace frowned. Someone had driven through recently. Too recently, Logan said, his voice darkened. He followed the tracks, crouched and examining them closely. Pickup truck. Maybe 2 days ago, if not less. Whoever it was, they had stopped here. Grace looked around cautiously. Who would dare drive this far into a storm? Because they took something, Logan said quietly. Luna paced now near the clearing's edge, tense and alert. They took something, Logan said quietly. Luna now paced restlessly at the edge of the clearing, sensing the invisible threat. A sharp bark sliced through the cold air, echoing at a broken fence that marked the beginning of private land. The weathered sign on the post read, Blake Ranch, no trespassing. Grace stepped up beside him, gently brushing snow off the sign. Blake Ranch, she whispered, a spark of recognition in her voice. That name sounds familiar. Logan's gaze narrowed, hardened by what he knew. They supply feed for livestock across half the county, he said quietly. They say Gordon Blake's racked up fines for trapping wild animals more than once. Some habits just don't go away, he added with grim certainty. Grace's expression faltered, unease creeping in. You think he took the pups? Logan's eyes turned toward the ranch, vast land, barely visible through the heavy, snow-thin smoke curling from a distant barn. I don't care what he traps, as long as it brings in money, he replied coldly. Luna barked again, this time louder, scratching at the damaged fence. Logan clenched his fists. Easy, girl, he said, but his voice was taut, fragile. Deep inside a part of him, the old warrior who never backed down from a fight, was awakening. Grace knows, he confessed. She met his gaze cautiously. Logan, you can't just walk onto private land. He turned to her, the harsh winter light cutting across his stern features. Those pups won't last much longer. I can't wait around for paperwork. Their breath mingled in the frosty air as they paused, two souls battered by loss, both afraid to open old wounds. Then softly she said, "If you're going, I'm going with you." He hesitated, but found steel in her steady eyes. Her unwavering resolve reminded him of comrades he once fought alongside, those who refused to turn away when life grew merciless. He gave a single nod. Together they skirted the perimeter, moving low beneath the skeletal trees. Logan's movements were sharp and deliberate, all instinct. Grace kept pace behind him, clutching her satchel close like a shield. As they neared the barn, Luna halted, ears pricked, body tense. From inside came a faint, shaky yelp, a desperate, fragile sound. Grace's eyes widened. "Did you hear that?" "Yeah," Logan whispered, voice barely more than breath. "They're inside." He motioned for her to stay back, but she shook her head firmly. Side by side, they crept closer. Snow crunched softly beneath their boots. A rusted truck sat near the barn, its tire tracks matching those in the nearby clearing. Logan's jaw tightened. "Blake," he muttered under his breath. The risk in daylight was too great, they held back. Luna whined, tugging at her leash as if pleading for immediate action. Logan crouched down, stroking her neck gently. "Not yet," he murmured. "We'll come back. I swear." That's when Grace noticed the fire igniting within him. The man who'd seemed withdrawn and distant just hours before now moved with quiet intensity, driven by a deep, fierce purpose. She wondered about the story he carried, the one that made him willing to risk everything for a hurt dog. On the journey back, Logan finally broke the silence. "You asked me yesterday why I named her Luna," he said softly. Grace nodded, hanging on every word. "I knew a teammate once," he began, voice low, haunted. "We served in Afghanistan. His name was Sam Luna Dempsey. He was the kind of man who could laugh through the gunfire. One night he saved my life, dragging me out after an explosion. Perhaps because I failed to save him, I can still save her." Grace felt a tight knot in her throat, silent but deeply understanding. Sometimes holding on to someone or something is the only way to keep moving forward. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was dipping behind the towering pines, casting a faint golden hue over the snow. Luna made a beeline for the window, her breath fogging the glass eyes fixed on the shadowy forest beyond. Logan stood quietly beside her, a hand resting gently on her back. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered, voice softening even further. "I won't let you lose them again." Those words caught even him off guard, the first promise he'd made to anyone since the war's dark days. Outside the woodland fell silent secrets tucked beneath the snow's quiet blanket. But this time Logan wasn't frightened by the stillness. He was listening. The next dawn arrived, muted gray and calm, the sky washed in pewter tones. A heavy, deliberate hush hung over the woods. Logan Hayes stood outside his cabin, his breath steaming in the cold air, eyes locked on the edge of the forest leading toward Blake Ranch. His mind churned all night, haunted by the ghostly tire tracks fading into the snow's white depths. Something waited beyond those trees. Something more than just Luna's missing pups. Luna paced near the porch, her paws pressing into the winter snow, ears tilted toward some distant sound. She had grown stronger, though a faint limp lingered. Her coat shone faintly under the cold light, and her bright eyes brimmed with restless spirit. Then she lifted her head and let out a sharp bark that tore through the silence. Then another. Logan's jaw clenched as he whispered, "You know where they are, don't you?" She barked once more, as if answering him. Inside, Grace Bennett packed a small satchel, bandages, antibiotics, water, and an old stethoscope weathered from too many emergencies. Her hands were steady, but her heart raced. She'd spent the night fearful Logan might rush headlong into danger without thinking. There was something in his eyes, that distant gaze she had seen haunting soldiers forever trapped on the battlefield. She recognized it because her late husband, Michael, had carried that same look, too. A volunteer medic in disaster zones, always the first to charge into chaos. And one day, chaos claimed him. When she stepped outside, Logan was fastening his boots, face set in that calm, unreadable determination that unnerved her. "You're going after them, aren't you?" she asked. He looked up, the faint light catching the scar tracing his jawline. "We can't wait for someone else. Those pups won't survive long." "Logan," she said gently, "you can't just cross onto private land." Gordon Blake isn't a man easily intimidated. He's been fined before and brushed it off. But he's dangerous. Logan's lips curled into something like a smile, not amusement, but knowing. "I've faced dangerous men before," he said quietly. Grace sighed, pulling her scarf tighter around her neck. "Then I'm coming with you. Someone has to keep you from getting yourself shot." He searched her face long and hard, then gave a single nod. "All right, but stay behind me. If things take a turn, you run." They set out in mid-morning, trailing the frozen path weaving through the woods. The forest around them was silent. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of snow underfoot and the steady panting of Luna's breath. The trail dipped down toward a valley where a wide clearing unfolded. From there, the Blake Ranch stretched out in the distance, a patchwork of rusted fences, broken-down tractors, and a sagging barn that seemed older than either of them. The nearer they came, the more restless Luna became. She low-growled, tail-rigid nose pressed close to the earth. Logan crouched, hand resting on her neck. "Easy," he murmured. Yet she remained on edge. Her fur bristled, and a deep, raw growl rumbled from her chest. A sound mingling recognition, sorrow, and fierce anger. Grace glanced toward the barn, where faint movement stirred behind the warped wooden boards. Smoke curled softly from the farmhouse chimney beyond. "He's home," she whispered. Logan's face tightened. Good. They moved along the property's edge, keeping low behind the fence. The wire was bent in spots, metal scarred with frost and rust. Logan's eyes swept every corner of the yard. His training clear, each step deliberate, every glance measuring danger. Grace watched him, realizing she was witnessing the soldier beneath the calm man she had met just days before. A shadow appeared near the barn. A tall, broad man, wiping his hands on the grease-stained rag. Even from afar, Logan recognized the heavy shoulders and slow gait of a man hardened by labor. His beard was thick and gray, his face weathered, his nose crooked as if broken long ago. Gordon Blake looked like he was carved from coarse wood strong, yet fractured by years of hardship. He wore a heavy plaid jacket torn at the elbow and a trucker cap pulled low. His small, dark eyes swept the yard like a hawk guarding its prey. Logan noticed the rifle leaning against the barn wall. "That's him," Grace breathed. "Yeah, that's him," Logan confirmed. Gordon moved toward a metal cage beside the barn. Something rattled inside. A faint whimper followed. Luna barked sharply, making Grace flinch. Blake froze, turning toward the noise. His eyes scanned the fence line. Logan cursed quietly. "Stay here," he murmured to Grace, then advanced through the snow, keeping low. But Luna wouldn't hold back. She lunged at the fence, barking frantically now, claws digging into the icy earth. Blake's face twisted in fury. "Who the hell's out there?" he shouted, grabbing his rifle. Logan rose, raising his hand slowly. "Easy," he called out. "Just hear about the dog." Blake squinted, lowering his weapon slightly, but not enough to ease the tension. "You trespassing on my land, mister," his voice rough, slurred with drink. "Just looking for what's ours," Logan replied quietly. "You've been trapping again, Gordon." Blake narrowed his eyes. "Watch your mouth, I catch what comes onto my land. None of your business." Grace stepped forward cautiously, voice gentle. "Mr. Blake, please, we're not here to cause any trouble." "There's a dog. I know exactly which dog you mean." Blake snapped his face, flushing with anger. "Something's been prowling around my land for weeks now. Nearly took out one of my chickens." Logan stepped forward, his voice dropping low with resolve. She was searching for her pups. A flicker of something guilt briefly crossed Blake's face. "Then you won't mind if I look," Logan replied calmly. Blake's lips twisted into a grimace far from a smile. "One more step and I'll put you down like the stray you're chasing." The air grew heavy, thick with tension. Grace's breath hitched in her throat. Logan remained steady, unshaken. His hand hovered near his side, empty of weapons, only the quiet strength of a man who's faced darker storms. "You don't want to make that mistake," he said quietly. "Not today." They stood locked in that quiet battle until a sound cut through. Soft, trembling, heart-wrenching, a whimper carrying from the barn. Grace gasped, heart in her throat. Blake swore under his breath and turned towards the barn. That was all the opening Logan needed. In 3 quick strides, he closed the gap, his hand seizing the rifle barrel and twisting it away before Blake even had a chance to react. Blake stumbled back into the snow, cursing, as Logan yanked open the barn door. The first thing hit was the smell hay oil, and something sour underneath it all. Inside the dim barn, a small wire cage sat against the far wall. Inside, 2 tiny German shepherd pups huddled close together, their dull coats and glassy eyes heavy with exhaustion. Grace rushed to them, dropping to her knees. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice trembling. The pups whimpered softly, pressing into her hands for comfort. Outside, Luna let out a long, broken howl that swept across the valley, carrying through the frozen air like grief transformed into a beautiful, haunting melody. Logan gently lifted the pups from the cage, their small frames trembling against his chest. "It's over," he murmured. "You're coming home." Behind him, Blake shouted bitter words, but Logan didn't look back. Grace rose beside him, tears glistening in her eyes. "Let's go," she said softly. Stepping into the fading light, Luna's cries rose once more, no longer cries of pain, but a call of recognition, a mother's long-awaited answer, echoing through the pines. Snow began to fall again by the time Logan and Grace returned to the cabin. The cold bit sharply at their faces, crisp and clean, carrying that faint metallic scent of cold iron. Logan's hands were numb even with gloves on. He held the 2 tiny German shepherd pups close to his chest, their fragile little bodies trembling beneath his coat. Luna trotted beside him, limping slightly, but never lagging behind. Her breath came in heavy puffs, fading into the gray evening air. She understood exactly what he carried. Every few steps, she looked up soft whimpers, urging him onward, as if urging him to hurry. Inside the cabin glowed warmly with a soft amber light. The fire Grace had rekindled before their journey still burned strong, filling the room with the comforting scent of pine wood. Logan laid the pups carefully on a thick wool blanket by the stove. They were so small, no older than 5 weeks, their fur patchy, their eyes glazed with deep exhaustion. One tiny squeak slipped out, and Luna immediately stirred her body trembling as she lowered herself gently beside them. Grace watched quietly, her heart tightening, as Luna began licking the pups, first frantic, then slow and tender. The pups whimpered faintly before snuggling into her chest, searching for warmth. Luna released a low, trembling rumble, neither growl nor cry, but an ancient sound born of grief finally unleashed. Logan sank down on his knees, resting an arm on the weathered floorboards, eyes fixed on the reunion. The firelight flickered in his steel blue eyes, revealing a rare glimmer of vulnerability beneath his hardened shell, awe, gentleness, and maybe even a trace of redemption. "They know her," Grace whispered, voice thick with feeling. "They never forgot," he replied softly. Silence stretched between them, heavy and reverent. Luna curled protectively around her pups, nuzzling their tiny faces, licking away the dust of captivity. Reassured, the pups began soft, rhythmic sucking motions, pressing against her side. That primal hum of life filled the cabin, replacing the mournful wind outside. Grace turned to Logan. He sat cross-legged by the fire, still clad in his coat, shoulders broad but bent forward slightly, the scar on his jaw gleaming in the firelight. His gaze was distant, as if watching some far-off memory. "You gave everything you had," she said gently. $350, that was your rent, wasn't it?" He shrugged. "They needed it more than I did." Grace studied him carefully. "You could have called animal control or the sheriff. You didn't have to do this yourself?" Logan gave a short, humorless laugh. "Maybe not, but nobody else would have acted fast enough. I've seen what hesitation costs." His eyes drifted to Luna and her pups. "When you lose too many, you start to believe speed is the only shield." Grace nodded slowly, understanding more than she wished to admit. After her husband's death, she learned how swiftly a moment can snatch everything away. One missed call, one wrong turn. Now looking at Logan, she saw a man still frozen in that unbearable instant. While Luna cared for her pups, Grace knelt nearby, examining them with gentle hands. "They're dehydrated but strong," she whispered. "I'll make them a warm blend of milk and water." "They'll pull through." Logan watched her work auburn braid cascading over one shoulder, her touch steady yet tender. There was a grace in her every movement, a grace shaped by years of saving fragile lives. "You do this often?" he asked. She gave a faint smile. "More times than I can count. My husband used to joke we'd run out of room for strays. I guess I never stopped after he left." Her voice softened, like a secret shared with the fire. Logan cleared his throat. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "About him." Grace's eyes caught the flames, reflecting a quiet strength. "I think he'd want to know I'm still helping." They sat quietly for a long moment, each wrapped in their own swirling thoughts. Luna shifted gently, curling more protectively around her pups, her breath deep and steady. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the rough log walls. Logan leaned back against the sturdy table leg, fatigue seeping into his bones, yet he felt rooted, unable to move. The room held a warmth unlike before, not merely from the fire, but from the precious life it embraced. Grace finished carefully tending to the pups, then rose, pouring 2 steaming mugs of tea. "Here," she offered, passing one to him. He accepted with a quiet nod, their fingers brushing briefly, a delicate human connection that caught them both off guard. Grace looked away, cheeks flushed, then settled across from him. "I thought I'd stopped rescuing anyone," Logan suddenly confessed. "When I left the Navy, I vowed never again to risk losing someone I cared about." But then he nodded toward Luna. She made sure that promise was impossible to keep. Grace gave a soft, understanding smile. "Perhaps it's not about saving others. Maybe it's about saving yourself." Logan stared into the flickering flames, letting that thought anchor itself. For the first time in what felt like forever, hope didn't seem out of reach. Outside, the night deepened, and the wind softened into a gentle lullaby. The pups slept soundly, their tiny chests rising and falling in sync with Luna's steady breath, exhausted yet serene. Luna rested her head on her paws, eyes half closed. From time to time, she rumbled softly, a quiet sound of peace. Grace gathered her things, preparing to leave. "I'll be back tomorrow," she promised. "I want to check their hydration and make sure Luna's wound hasn't reopened." "You sure you can make it back down that trail?" Logan asked. She smiled with quiet resolve. "I've driven through worse for smaller miracles." At the door, she paused, watching him closely. "You did good today, Logan," she said softly. "You gave them a home." He glanced toward this fire, then back at her. "Yeah, I did." When she left, the cabin fell into silence again, but this was a different kind of quiet one, filled with warmth, and not loneliness. Logan fed another log to the fire, then settled beside Luna. She lifted her head, their eyes meeting. "You're safe now?" he whispered. Luna's tail thumped faintly against the floor. The 2 pups nestled closer into her fur, one sighing softly in sleep. Logan leaned back, resting his arm on his knee, watching the flames flicker. For the first time since his deployment, the edges of his mouth twitched upward, a small, cautious smile, but genuine, a spark of light amid a long, dark night. Outside, snow drifted down in slow, elegant spirals, blanketing the day's scars beneath a gentle white quilt. Inside, bathed in amber glow, A wounded soldier and a weary mother dog had found something whole again. Spring was beginning to tease the Montana mountains, though winter still clung on stubbornly. The air held the faint scent of thawing earth, and around Logan Hayes' cabin snow had started retreating, uncovering patches of damp moss and tenacious grass. Inside, the fire still burned, but it was no longer a fire glowing with mere survival. A profound sense of warmth settled in. The cabin once swallowed by silence now breathed life. Luna lay dozing close to the hearth. Her pups, two vigorous tumbling bundles of black and tan, clumsily tumbled nearby. They were growing swiftly, their movements gaining surety, their eyes gleaming with life. From time to time, Luna lifted her head to watch them, her face awash with pride and quiet solace. Logan sat by the window, coffee cup in hand, observing the morning mist lift from the valley below. His beard had thickened, streaked with silver, and for the first time in years, a softness stirred in his gaze. He had taken to repairing the fence behind the cabin, mending gaps, chopping firewood for the summer months. Simple, ordinary tasks, but for a man who once existed solely within patterns of regret and routine, they felt nothing short of miraculous. Grace Bennett had woven herself steadily into his world. She came up from town every few days, bearing supplies and gentle chastisements. Her auburn hair was usually tucked beneath a woolen cap, stray strands softly framing her fair complexion. Her blue-gray eyes bore kindness, but were never idle. They belonged to someone who saw every wound and refused to turn away. That morning she arrived carrying a box of medicine and a newspaper tucked under her arm. "Your boys are turning into little rascals," she said with a smile, as one of the pups nipped her bootlace. "They get it from their mother," Logan replied, glancing at Luna, who raised her head as if she understood. Grace laughed, setting the box down. "Maybe they take after their guardian." She teased, her tone brightening the room, yet Logan noticed her smile never quite reached her eyes. "Something's wrong?" he asked. She hesitated, unfolding the newspaper. "They printed my proposal for the Hope for Strays Fund. I thought it might rally some support in town." Logan sipped his coffee. "That sounds like good news." Grace let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You'd think so, but half the town thinks it's a waste. They say there are bigger issues than feeding lost animals. Some told me to stop chasing impossible miracles." Logan leaned back, his jaw tightening. "When people forget what mercy looks like, they say things like that." Her gaze softened. "You sound like someone who still remembers." Before he could answer, Luna snapped her head up suddenly, ears stiff, nose twitching toward the open window. Logan's instincts flared instantly. He followed her gaze to the tree line. Nothing visibly stirred, but the forest held an unnatural stillness. No birdsong, no rustling breeze, just a heavy, expectant silence. Grace caught his shift in demeanor. "What is it?" Logan set down his mug and approached the window, eyes narrowing. "Something's out there." Luna stood growling low and fierce. Her pups pressed close, sensing her tension. Logan slipped on his coat and stepped into the cold air, which felt different now, heavier somehow. He scanned the woods until his eyes caught faint tire tracks etched into the slushy road winding up from the valley. Worry knitting her brow. "What's wrong, Fresh Tracks truck tires?" Her eyes widened in alarm. "Gordon." He nodded, grim as ever. "He's back." Nearly 3 weeks had passed since their last confrontation. Logan believed Gordon Blake would vanish for good after losing his illegal catch and receiving that sharp warning. But men like Blake never surrender quietly. Logan felt the old chill of anger rise again within him. The same instinct that once drove him to charge toward gunfire instead of fleeing. Grace stepped forward, voice steady. "We should call the sheriff." He shook his head firmly. "By the time they arrive, he'll be gone or worse. You're not going after him alone." Logan said nothing. He turned his gaze back into the forest, eyes scanning for any sign of movement. The faint hum of an engine drifted softly through the trees. "Get Luna and the pups inside. Lock the door." Grace's heart hammered in her chest. "Logan, please don't do anything reckless. You've got them to protect now." He looked back at her, and for a brief moment the walls around him crumbled. "That's exactly why I have to do this. Grabbing his rifle from behind the door, he began down the path. Grace stood frozen, a heartbeat, before springing into action. She dashed inside, heart racing, grabbing her phone. There was no signal this high up, but she remembered the old ranger station 5 miles down the trail. There was a radio there. Meanwhile, Logan pursued the sound deeper into the woods. Snow crunched beneath his boots with steady rhythm. A faint scent of gasoline hung in the cold air. As he reached the clearing's edge, he spotted the truck, an old black pickup idling near the valley's fence line. Gordon Blake stood beside it, cigarette dangling from his lip rifle casually slung over one shoulder. His eyes were bloodshot, clothes worn and grimy. He looked rougher now, face tight with bitterness and sleepless nights. "Well, if it isn't the hero," Gordon sneered as Logan stepped into view. "You made me lose a lot of money." "Walk away," Gordon Logan replied evenly. "You're not getting that dog again." Gordon barked a harsh, cruel laugh. "You think you can dictate what's mine? You stole what I caught. I'm just here to collect." Logan's grip on his rifle tightened. "You're trespassing." Gordon motioned toward the truck. "And you're outnumbered." 2 men stepped out, young, scruffy, each holding cheap shotguns. They looked nervous, unshaven, like farmhands who'd taken a dangerous job for quick cash. "You don't have to do this," Logan said, calm but cutting. "You don't want to die because of someone else's mistake." The taller man hesitated, eyes flicking to Gordon, but Blake snapped quiet. "Get the cage." Just then, a sharp siren wailed from the ridge slicing through the stillness. Gordon froze. Logan glanced toward the valley, where faint red and blue lights danced through the trees. Grace had come through. Gordon cursed, spitting onto the snow. "You called them." Logan stepped forward. "No," he answered, but someone wiser than me did. Before the men could react, the sheriff's truck rumbled into the clearing. 2 deputies stepped out, rifles locked and ready. "Drop your weapons," one commanded. Gordon hesitated too long. Logan's voice thundered from behind him. "Don't do this, Blake." The older man turned just as the deputies closed in. In moments, they forced him to the ground, swearing and struggling, while his accomplices reluctantly dropped their guns. Grace arrived minutes later, out of breath, cheeks flushed from the icy air. She had ridden with the sheriff after contacting the ranger station's radio. When she caught sight of Logan standing there, unscathed, relief flooded her face. "You always have to take the hardest route," she said, half laughing, half weeping. Logan exhaled deeply, lowering his rifle. "Seems like I need someone to keep me grounded." As the deputies loaded the men into the truck, Luna appeared at the tree line, her pups stumbling eagerly behind her. She stopped beside Logan, pressing close against his leg, eyes shining with quiet understanding. Grace stepped up beside him. Their hands brushed briefly, but it was enough. For the first time, the look he gave her went beyond gratitude. It was trust. The sheriff nodded at Logan. "You did great, Hayes. Maybe it's time you stop being so alone out here." Logan glanced at Grace, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I'm beginning to believe that too." The last remnants of winter clung like shadows among the pines. Snow still held on to the shaded hollows, but the air had softened, rich with the scent of damp earth and fresh starts. A month had slipped by since the night Gordon Blake was cuffed and taken away, and the valley was already beginning to mend. So were the hearts of its people. Logan Hayes stood outside his cabin, sleeves rolled up to his forearms, chopping firewood under the pale morning sun. The steady rhythm of his axe echoed patiently through the clearing. His once hollow face had regained its strength, and though lines still framed his steely blue eyes, the haunted look had faded. Life now lived within them. Luna stretched nearby on the thawing earth. Her coat shimmered in the sunlight, golden-brown patches catching every glimmer. Her 2 pups, nearly grown, tumbled noisily at her side, all paws and overflowing energy. Logan chuckled quietly. "You'd think they'd run out of steam eventually," he murmured, wiping sweat from his brow. But Luna's gaze wasn't on their play. Her ears twitched, tail flicked in a calm, watchful rhythm. Something was different in her, gentler, slower. When she shifted, Logan noticed the soft curve of her belly. He knelt beside her, voice low. "It's you again, huh?" He smiled, rubbing behind her ear. Looks like you've got more fight than all of us combined. Inside the cabin, Grace Bennett sifted through a box of supplies. Clean towels, glass vials of disinfectant, and rolls of gauze. Her clinic had reopened 2 weeks ago, and she'd scarcely had a moment to rest. Wearing a light flannel shirt rolled at the elbows, her auburn hair tied loosely, a pencil tucked just behind one ear, she glanced up and caught Logan's reflection shimmering in the window, a soft smile unfolding on her lips. That kind of smile, the kind that now came effortlessly, like a gentle breath of hope. Above her town clinic, a new sign read, Hope Haven Veterinary, painted in calming shades of blue and white, named in honor of Luna, and quietly maybe a tribute to Logan, too. At first, the townspeople were doubtful, but when Grace shared the story, the rescue, the reunion the night when the snow carried cries through the forest, their hearts softened. Rugged ranchers arrived with wounded cattle. Families brought in stray dogs seeking guidance, and donations slowly began to flow. In that tiny town that once scoffed at her dreams, Grace Bennett's light began to shine bright again. That afternoon, as she climbed the mountain, Grace brought a guest, an older woman named Martha Green, one of the first locals to believe in her vision. Martha, in her late 60s, tall, yet slightly curved with age, silver hair braided neatly beneath a knitted cap, her hands calloused from years spent tending the earth, her face warm with a gentle kindness. Her smile was the kind that seemed to coax secrets from strangers. "So this is the legendary Luna," Martha said, kneeling beside the dog, her voice roughened by laughter and years. "She's even more stunning than Grace described." Luna sniffed gently at Martha's outstretched hand, her tail thumping with quiet joy. "She's expecting again," Grace said, pride swelling in her chest. "A miracle after all she's endured." Martha nodded knowingly. Life has a way of finding its path. Sometimes it just takes someone stubborn enough to give it a shot. Martha's gaze drifted to Logan standing nearby, sleeves rolled up, the sun glinting off the scar tracing his jawline. "And I suppose that someone was you?" Logan offered a humble half-smile, simple and sincere. "Just following what felt right." Martha's eyes sparkled. Men who say that usually end up doing more good than they realize. The trio spent the afternoon piecing together a small wooden pen beside the cabin. Nothing fancy, just a sturdy shelter, shaded with hay and soft blankets. Logan worked with quiet determination, driving nails into place as Grace handed him tools with steady hands. Martha's voice lightened the work, sometimes offering advice, sometimes teasing. "You two make a good team," she remarked slyly at one point. Grace blushed, pretending not to catch the meaning behind the words. When the pen was finished, they stepped back to admire their handiwork. The melting snow dripped from the eaves, sunlight pouring over the clearing like liquid gold. Luna wandered inside the enclosure, sniffing the fresh straw, then circled a few times before settling down, calm and content. Her 2 older pups, now grown their legs still awkwardly long, stood at a distance, curious yet respectful. As dusk fell softly, Grace and Martha readied to return to town. "You'll call if anything happens?" Grace asked with steady resolve. Logan nodded. "You'll be the first to know." Martha reached down, patting Luna's head gently. "Take care of yourself, Mama. You've got a good man watching your back." When they left, the valley hushed once more, bathed in golden light from the setting sun. Logan sat on the porch steps watching the horizon glow behind the craggy mountains. He could hear Luna's soft breathing from the pen, steady and calm, blending with the gentle drip of melting snow from the roof above. A quiet calm filled the air, a kind of peace he had feared lost forever. But later that night, a fierce spring rainstorm tore through. Gentle and warm, it swept away all the last remnants of ice. Logan stirred awake to Luna's soft, aching whine. He lit a lantern and stepped out the rain soaking straight through his shirt. In the pen, Luna paced restlessly, shifting side to side, panting hard. He knelt beside her, his hand tenderly resting on her shoulder. "Easy now, girl. You've faced this before." The puppies, her very first litter, huddled in the corner, eyes wide with awe, sensing something sacred unfolding. Hours stretched slowly by, rain pattering gently, blending with Luna's heavy breaths.